They took the counter first, then the register, then the ladder, then the old radio that only picked up the gospel station out of Corbin. They laughed about the inventory, called it junk, called the whole building a tax write-off waiting to happen. And then, in a stockroom nobody had swept in 8 months, an 80-year-old woman picked up a crowbar. It was her husband's crowbar. He'd used it for 50 years. She started prying a pegboard off the wall. "It's just a building, Mum. Dad's been gone 8 months. Let it go." Roger had the realtor's sign printed before his mother even took her black dress to the cleaners. He'd had it made up glossy. A photo insert. For sale stamped across a picture of Hutchins' hardware feed. Somebody's drone had taken it from above. The tin roof showed rust streaks. The gravel lot showed cracks and weeds. He'd chosen the font himself. He was proud of how fast he'd moved. Delia Hutchins did not answer him right away. She held the phone a little away from her ear. It was the way she used to hold the church bulletin when the print got too small. She looked out the kitchen window at the ridge. Everett used to walk the dog up there before the sun came up. Back when there was a dog. Back when there was an Everett. "You didn't ask me," she said. "I'm asking you now. There's a buyer. A real one. Self-storage outfit out of Lexington, guy named Purcell. He wants the lot, not the stock. He doesn't care what's inside. 40,000 for the dirt, Mum. Nobody's going to give you more than that for a dead hardware store on a dead street." "It's not dead," she said. "It's closed." "There's a difference. Same thing in 6 months." She didn't argue that part. She hung up instead. Gently, the way she hung up on telemarketers. She stood in her kitchen a long moment, her hands still on the phone. Then she got her keys off the hook by the door. The ring still had the store key on it, worn smooth and silver, from 50 years of Everett's thumb. She drove the 11 miles into Milford Gap. She'd made that drive every Tuesday since the funeral. Nobody had asked her to. Nobody but Wendell Boyce ever noticed she did. She had been sweeping that porch for 8 months. She watered the one geranium in the front window. It had been there when Everett died, and she was not going to be the one who let it die too. She never told anyone. She never complained that no one else came. Milford Gap sat off Route 9 in the Kentucky Hill Country, 30 minutes from the nearest Lowe's. It was the kind of town where the feed mill had closed in the 90s and never reopened. Everybody still called the empty lot the mill, like it might come back one day. Hutchins' hardware feed sat on Depot Street across from it, a low brick building, a tin awning. A bell over the door that Everett had hung himself in 1974. It still worked. It still gave that clean, bright note when the door swung. Nobody had heard it in 8 months, except Delia. Alone every Tuesday, she unlocked the door, the bell rang. The smell hit her the way it always did. Machine oil and sawdust. The particular mustiness of a building that had been holding its breath. Dust sat thick on the counter, where Everett used to lean and talk crop rotation, with men twice her age. The register Roger had already sold sat in a rental truck somewhere between here and an auction house in Lexington. She hadn't fought him on the register. She'd decided a long time ago which battles were worth an old woman's breath. She swept the porch first out of habit, the broom strokes even and unhurried. Then she went inside to check on things, the way she did every week. She walked the aisles of nails and hinges and seed packets gone soft with age. She ran a hand along shelves Everett had built with his own 2 hands, out of lumber he'd milled himself. At the register, in the drawer where the till used to sit, she found a folded slip of paper. It was taped to the underside of the wood, yellowed, the tape gone brittle. She had to pick at the corner with her thumbnail to work it loose. Everett's handwriting, cramped and slanted, the way it always was after his hand started shaking near the end. "Don't sell the walls till you've swept behind them." She read it twice. She had no idea what it meant. She folded it small and put it in her cardigan pocket, next to a grocery list from 3 days before he died that she still hadn't thrown away. She stood there a long moment, her palm flat on the counter he'd built, feeling the grain of it under her hand. Then the bell over the door rang again. Wendell Boyce stood in the doorway in his work boots, 76 years old, cap in his hands. He looked like a man who'd walked into the wrong decade. "Everett around," he said. "Truck's due in Tuesday. I figured I'd get an early start." He stopped. He looked at the dust on the counter, the empty pegs where tools used to hang, the register-shaped square of clean floor, where something heavy had recently been dragged out. "Delia," he said, and his voice went careful. Where's Everett? Nobody had told him. That was the thing nobody thought about. Wendell Boyce had driven delivery for Everett Hutchins for 31 years. He'd shown up every Tuesday like a man reporting for duty, long after there was a paycheck worth reporting for. Everett had kept him on part-time even when the store could barely afford full-time. Somewhere in the scramble of funeral arrangements and casseroles and Roger's phone calls about probate, somebody should have called Wendell. Nobody had. He passed in November, Delia said. The funeral was small. I should have called you, Wendell. I don't know why I didn't. Wendell didn't say anything for a moment. He turned his cap over once in his hands, the way men of a certain age do, when they don't trust their own face to hold still. Then he set the cap on the counter, the one Everett had built. He picked up a broom leaning by the door. He started sweeping the back aisle without being asked. Well, he said, might as well get started then. They swept together in silence for a while. The only sound was the scratch of bristles on old floorboards and the tick of the tin roof settling in the afternoon heat. Delia watched him work. This old man had shown up on a day nobody paid him for. He'd found out his friend of 31 years was dead, and he'd answered it by picking up a broom. She thought about Roger's voice on the phone. 40,000 for the dirt. Something in her chest went hard and quiet and certain, in a way it hadn't been since the funeral. Roger wants to sell it, she said. Some man from Lexington wants the lot for storage units. Wendell stopped sweeping. Sell it to who? A developer. Purcell, Roger called him. Purcell. Wendell said the name like it tasted bad. Fellow's been buying up half of Depot Street the last few years. Bought the old feed mill lot 2 years back. Been trying to get his hooks into the block ever since, from what I hear at the diner. Roger says it's just a building. Says it's been 8 months. Says I need to let it go. Wendell was quiet a moment. He looked around the stockroom. At the shelves gone dusty. At the pegboard on the back wall, hanging a little crooked. One corner pulled away from the studs, like it had warped in the damp. Everett built half this store with his own hands, he said. Man didn't do anything without a reason. You want my opinion, Delia? Before you let your son sell so much as a nail off this lot, you ought to know what you're selling. She thought about the note in her pocket. Don't sell the walls till you've swept behind them. I need 1 more week, she told Roger that evening. She was on the phone, standing in her kitchen. The dog's old water bowl still sat by the door, because she hadn't been able to make herself move it. To clear out your father's things. That's all I'm asking. Purcell wants to walk the lot Friday. Then he'll walk it a week from Friday, she said. For the first time in 8 months, her voice didn't shake when she said it. Roger sighed the particular sigh he'd been sighing at her since he was 14. The one that meant he thought she was being difficult about something that didn't matter. Fine. 1 week. But Mom, there's nothing in that store worth saving. Dad's inventory's 40 years old. It's junk. Then it won't hurt to let me look through it, she said, and hung up before he could sigh again. She thought about Candace too. Candace never called her directly anymore. Not since the funeral. Not since the reading of Everett's simple will. It left the store and the house to Delia outright. It left Roger, quite reasonably, nothing but his father's tools. And Roger had immediately suggested selling those too. Candace was the one who'd found Purcell's number. Candace was the one who kept a running list, Delia knew, though she'd never seen it, of what things were worth and what things weren't. She went back to the store the next morning before Wendell arrived. She let herself in with the key, worn smooth by Everett's thumb. She started in the stockroom, box by box, the way you clear out a life 1 shelf at a time. She found receipts going back to the Carter administration. She found a coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Boss," a joke gift from one of the seasonal boys 20 years back, and Everett had used it every single day since. In a drawer under the workbench, she found a stack of unopened seed catalogues. Everett could never bring himself to throw away anything with a picture of a tomato on it. Then she found something else. She leaned her weight against the pegboard, meaning to move a box behind it. The pegboard did not sit flush against the wall the way it should have. It gave, just slightly, at the bottom corner, just enough that a woman who'd spent 50 years watching her husband build things would notice. She thought, that's not right. She didn't say anything to Wendell when he arrived that morning. She wasn't ready to say anything to anyone. She swept the front aisle instead. She watered the geranium. She waited until he'd gone home for the evening. Then she went back to the stockroom alone, a flashlight from the truck in one hand, and in the other, Everett's crowbar. the one he'd used to open crates for 50 years. Don't sell the walls till you've swept behind them. She set the flashlight down on a shelf, angled at the pegboard. She worked the flat end of the crowbar into the gap at the bottom corner, the way she'd watched Everett pry open 100 crates over the decades. Easy pressure. Patience. Let the tool do the work instead of your back. The board groaned. A nail popped free with a sound like a knuckle cracking. She kept going, slow and even, sweat starting at her collar, despite the cool of the stockroom. 80 years old, alone in a dark building at 9 o'clock at night, prying at a wall her husband had built. All because he'd left her a note that made no sense any other way. The board came away all at once, swinging out on one stubborn nail like a door on a bad hinge. Behind it was not insulation, not studs, not the plain dumb backside of a wall. Behind it was another wall, a shallow one, built maybe 8 inches back from the first, framed out in 2x4s that didn't match the rest of the building's lumber. Newer wood, sanded smooth. The kind of careful work a man does when he means for something to last, and doesn't want anyone stumbling onto it by accident. Delia Hutchins stood in the dark stockroom, the flashlight trembling slightly in her hand. She was looking at a wall inside a wall, one her husband had built without telling her, in a store she had thought she knew every inch of after 50 years. For the first time since November, she felt something that was not quite grief, and not quite fear. She felt curious. She felt, God help her, a little bit alive. She did not open the false wall that night. Her hands were shaking too hard. Some part of her, the same part that had waited 8 months to ask Roger a single hard question, told her this was not a thing to rush. Whatever Everett had built back there had waited this long. It could wait until morning, until Wendell, until she had both her wits and a friend beside her. She put the pegboard back as best she could, screwed loose but upright. She turned off the flashlight and stood a moment in the dark, the smell of sawdust and machine oil all around her. She said it out loud to no one, to the building, to the dark, to the man who wasn't there to answer. What did you do, Everett? The bell over the door didn't ring. Nothing answered her. But driving home that night, under a sky gone thick with stars, the way it only does in country dark, Delia Hutchins found she wasn't thinking about Roger's realtor sign. She wasn't thinking about Purcell's $40,000. She wasn't thinking about the week she had left before someone came to measure her husband's store for storage units. She was thinking about a note taped under a till, a wall inside a wall. 50 years of a marriage she'd thought had no more secrets left in it. She was wrong about that. She was about to find out exactly how wrong. The next morning she was at the store before 7, before Wendell, before the sun had fully cleared the ridge. She stood in the stockroom with a cup of coffee, going cold in her hand, looking at the crooked pegboard, like it might tell her something if she waited long enough. It didn't. Nothing in that building had ever told her anything on its own. Everett had never been a man who explained himself in words. He explained himself in built things. A shelf that held exactly the right amount of weight. A door hinge oiled before it could squeak. A note taped where only a person clearing out his register drawer would find it. Wendell came in at 7:30, same as always, cap in hand, and found her standing there. "You look like you didn't sleep," he said. "I found something," she said. "Behind the pegboard. There's another wall back there. Everett built it." Wendell set his cap down slow, like a man setting down something heavier than a cap. "Show me." They worked the panel loose together this time. It was easier with 2 sets of hands. Behind the shallow false wall, tucked into the space Everett had framed out, sat a single metal toolbox, the old tin kind, with a hasp latch, painted a green that had mostly worn to bare metal at the corners from handling. Delia lifted it out herself. It was heavier than it looked. She set it on the workbench, the same one where Everett had sharpened blades and cut keys and mixed paint for half a century. She worked the latch with fingers that didn't want to cooperate. When the lid came up, the smell of old leather and older coin rose up to meet her. A coffee can sat wedged in one corner, the label long gone. When she tipped it, silver dollars slid out across the workbench with a sound like small bells, more of them than she could count at a glance, dated across 4 decades, worn smooth from handling. Beneath the coffee can sat a ledger, green cloth cover, corners gone soft, the kind of book you bought at the feed store itself, back when the feed store still sold such things. Delia opened it. Wendell leaned in close beside her. Together they read Everett Hutchins's handwriting, cramped and careful, going back further than either of them had words for at first. It was not a record of what people owed him. It was a record of what he had forgiven. Names, dates, amounts. Beside each one, in the same steady hand, the words settled. Under some of them, smaller, almost embarrassed looking, the words don't tell them. Lord, Wendell said softly. Lord have mercy. He knew half the names. Everyone in Milford Gap over the age of 50 knew half the names. Half the town had walked into Hutchins Hardware at one bad point or another. A bad crop year, a husband out of work, a roof that needed fixing before the rent was due. They'd walk out with what they needed and a debt on the books. Everett had quietly erased it the moment the customer's back was turned. He never once mentioned it again. Not to his wife, not to his son, not to a single living soul. He never told me, Delia said. She wasn't crying. She was too stunned to cry. 50 years of her husband's silent generosity sat spread out under a single bare bulb in a stockroom. She thought of every night he'd come home tired and said the store had had a slow week. Every year he'd told her money was tight. Now she understood exactly why, with a clarity that felt almost violent. That's Everett, Wendell said, and there was something thick in his voice. Man'd rather go without than let a soul in this town feel small for needing help. Under the ledger, folded flat against the bottom of the toolbox, sat a manila folder gone soft with age. No name on the tab, just a date written in pencil that had faded almost to nothing. Delia opened it with hands that had stopped pretending not to shake. Inside were deeds, 3 of them folded in thirds, county seal stamped on each. They described 3 parcels of land she did not recognise by their legal terms, but she recognised them instantly by the plat map stapled behind. The 2 empty, weed-choked lots flanking the store on either side. The ones she'd always assumed belonged to the county, or to no one, or simply to time. Everett owns these, she said. Wendell took the papers gently from her hands and studied them, a long moment. His lips moved slightly as he worked through the legal language, the way a man does when he's read more invoices than deeds in his life. Looks like he bought 'em, he said. 1 at a time by these dates. This one here is from 11 years back. This one's from 6. He looked up at her. Delia, these are the 2 lots on either side of the store. Every one of them commercial zoned, same as the store itself. That's the whole block. Near enough. She sat down on an overturned crate, the ledger open in her lap, the silver dollars still scattered across the workbench catching the bare bulb's light. She thought about Roger's voice on the phone. 40,000 for the dirt. Nobody's going to give you more than that for a dead hardware store on a dead street. Purcell wants the storage unit lot, she said slowly. Roger's been telling him it's just the 1 parcel. The store. If Everett owns the 2 lots beside it too, Wendell said, then whatever Purcell's planning, he can't build it without those. Not without your say-so. Delia looked down at the ledger, at 40 years of quiet forgiveness, written in her dead husband's hand. She thought about a note taped under a till. Don't sell the walls till you've swept behind them. I need to see the county clerk, she said. Today, before Roger finds out any of this exists. She drove into the county seat that same afternoon, the folder of deeds on the passenger seat beside her, like a thing that might bolt if she looked away too long. She sat across a scratched government-issue desk from a records clerk named Odell Farrow. He'd known Everett Hutchins for 30 years. He put on his reading glasses with the particular slowness of a man about to confirm something he already half suspected. These are recorded, Mrs. Hutchins, he said, after a long, quiet study of the documents. Recorded and clean. Your husband bought parcel 411 in 2013, cash sale, and 412 back in 2018. Both commercial zoned, both clear of liens. He looked up at her over the glasses. You didn't know he owned these? No, Delia said. I did not. Odell sat back in his chair. He took his glasses off and rubbed the bridge of his nose, the way men do when they're deciding how much of their own opinion to offer a widow. I'll tell you something, Mrs. Hutchins, and you can do with it what you like. There's a fellow named Purcell been circling this block for 2 years. Bought the old mill lot, been trying to piece together enough contiguous ground for one of these self-storage operations. Word around the courthouse is he's had his surveyor out twice already, measuring for a permits application, banking on getting your family's lot to round out the parcel. He tapped the deeds with one finger. Man's building his whole application around getting land that, as of this desk right here, he does not have any right to, and never did. Delia drove home slower than she'd driven in years, both hands steady on the wheel. The folder of deeds went locked now in the store's old fireproof safe, where Everett had kept the important papers. The ledger sat tucked beside it. The coffee can of silver dollars rode on the passenger seat, because she hadn't been able to make herself leave it behind. She did not tell Roger. Not yet. She had learned in the space of 2 days that the walls of her marriage held more rooms than she'd known to look for. She was not going to hand her son the map to any of them until she understood the whole house herself. That evening the phone rang. She almost didn't answer it, tired down to her bones in a way sleep hadn't touched in months. But the number was local, and something made her pick up. Mrs. Hutchins. A woman's voice, older, careful. This is Pearl Whitfield. I don't know if you remember me. Everett used to carry my family through some hard winters, years back, when my husband was out of work. Delia sat down slowly at the kitchen table. I remember the name, she said, though she didn't. Not really, not among so many names written in a green ledger. I heard around town the store might be closing for good, Pearl said, selling the lot. And I got to thinking, I never did pay your husband back for what he carried us through back in '09. He always said not to worry on it. But I've got a little put by now, and I'd like to make it right if you'll let me. Delia closed her eyes. 2 more calls came that same week. Names she now recognised from a green cloth ledger. People who had heard the rumour of a closing store and decided on their own, without prompting, that old debts deserved settling, even now that the man who'd forgiven them was gone. She did not tell them yet what she needed the money for. She simply thanked them. She told them Tuesday was fine. She hung up the phone each time with her hand pressed flat against her chest, as if she could keep something from spilling out of it. Roger called Thursday, his voice bright with the particular cheer of a man who believes he is calling with good news. Purcell's ready to move fast, he said. Says if we can close within 30 days, he'll bump the offer to 45. That's real money, Mum. I already told him yes. You told him yes, Delia repeated. On the store lot, sure. I've got power of attorney on some of Dad's remaining business affairs. You signed that back when he first got sick, remember? I'm just trying to help you, Mum. You shouldn't have to deal with all this at your age. Delia sat very still, the phone warm against her ear. She was thinking about a power of attorney she had indeed signed 2 years ago, in a hospital hallway, exhausted and frightened, grateful someone was willing to handle the paperwork. She was thinking about how a piece of paper meant to help a dying man's affairs get settled had somehow, in her son's hands, become a key he thought fit every lock in the building. That power of attorney ended when your father passed, Roger, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. You know that as well as I do. The store is mine now, free and clear. There was a pause on the line. Purcell's already drawn up paperwork based on the walk-through Friday. You said we could walk it Friday. You can walk the building Friday, Delia said. Nobody's signing anything Friday. She hung up before he could sigh at her again. She sat at the kitchen table with the coffee can of silver dollars beside her. For the first time in 8 months of quiet grief, Delia Hutchins let herself feel something closer to anger than sorrow. She found she did not mind the feeling at all. Friday came up clear and warm, the kind of Kentucky spring morning Everett used to say was good for planting. Purcell arrived at 9 sharp in a truck that cost more than the store's entire annual revenue in its best year. He brought a younger man with a tablet and a tape measure. Brisk and unbothered, the manner of someone who has walked 100 properties just like this one, and expects this to be the 101st. Roger was already there when Delia pulled up, standing on the porch beside Candace in a blazer he did not usually wear on a Friday. He looked like a man rehearsing a role he badly wanted to play well. Mom, he said, coming down the steps, this is Mr. Purcell. Mr. Purcell, my mother, Delia. Purcell shook her hand with the brief, efficient grip of a man who had somewhere else to be. Beautiful old building, Mrs. Hutchins. We'll be sensitive to that in the design, of course. Keep some of the brick facade if the numbers work out. That's kind, Delia said. We'll want to walk the full lot, Purcell said, already turning toward the side yard, toward the weed-choked ground that flanked the store on either side. He clearly believed it came bundled with whatever paperwork Roger had waved in front of him. My surveyors flagged the boundary already. but I like to see it with my own eyes before we finalise the site plan. That would be the 2 lots on either side, Delia said. 411 and 412. Purcell glanced at her, the first genuinely attentive look he'd given her since arriving. That's right. Your family's parcel, as I understand it. It is, Delia said. It's my parcel. Mine alone. My husband bought those 2 lots years ago and recorded them in his name. When he passed, they came to me the same as the store did. Roger doesn't own so much as a fence post on this property. The porch went quiet. Candace's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Roger's rehearsed smile slid sideways, the way a picture frame slides when the nail behind it starts to give. Mom, that's not right. The listing paperwork I gave Mr. Purcell covers the whole lot. The listing paperwork you gave Mr. Purcell, Delia said, covers property you never had a legal right to list. I'd suggest, Mr. Purcell, that before your surveyor flags anything else, you have your attorney pull the recorded deeds at the county clerk's office. Ask for Odell Farrow. He'll be expecting you. Purcell looked from Delia to Roger and back again. Something in his face shifted, from brisk, unbothered efficiency to the particular stillness of a man doing rapid math on how much of his site plan just became worthless paper. Roger, Purcell said, you told my team you held clear title to develop the full contiguous parcel. I didn't mean, Roger started. He didn't, Delia said quietly. I did. I still do. Purcell folded his tablet under his arm, like a man closing a book he'd decided not to finish reading. I'll have my attorney call the county tomorrow morning, he said. Mrs. Hutchins, I apologise for the confusion. It seems there's been a misunderstanding on my end of things. There's been a misunderstanding on somebody's end, Delia said, and did not look at her son. Purcell's assistant folded the tape measure without being asked. The two of them left within 10 minutes. The big truck pulled out of the gravel lot in a way that felt, to Delia, like a held breath finally let go. Candace stood on the porch with her arms crossed, saying nothing, her face doing the careful blank work of a woman recalculating a future she'd already spent in her head. You could have told me, Roger said, once the truck was gone. His voice had lost its Friday blazer confidence. About the lots, before you humiliated me in front of him. I didn't know myself until Wednesday, Delia said. Your father never told me either. Dad bought land and didn't tell anyone. That doesn't sound like Dad. No, Delia agreed. It doesn't. And yet, she didn't invite them in. She watched Roger and Candace walk to their car. Candace leaned close and said something low that made Roger's shoulders tighten. Delia went back inside the store, alone. She locked the door behind her, though it was the middle of the day, and stood a long moment at the counter Everett had built, breathing. Wendell found her there an hour later. He'd been in the back the whole time, close enough to hear most of it, tactful enough to let her handle her own son without an audience. He'll come around, Wendell said. Or he won't. Either way, you did right. I don't know if I did right, Wendell. I know I did what Everett would have wanted. That's not always the same thing. In my experience, Wendell said, it mostly is. They spent the rest of that week going through the toolbox properly. Delia worked with a legal pad. Wendell worked with the ledger open across his knees. They cross-referenced names against people he still saw around town, at church, at the diner, people who'd been driving 30 minutes off to Corbin or Somerset for hardware. Because Milford Gap hadn't had a store of its own in 8 months. The ledger ran to nearly 200 names by the time they finished counting. Not all of them were forgiveness entries. Some were ordinary business, paid in full the ordinary way, cash or cheque, nothing hidden about it. But threaded through 4 decades of ordinary commerce were 60, maybe 70 entries, where Everett had crossed out a balance owed and written settled in its place. His own hand, his own decision. No explanation given because none had been asked for. The dollar figures, added up plain, came to just under $19,000 in forgiven debt across the years. Not a fortune by itself, but it was a portrait. Delia understood that better than any number could tell her. A portrait of a man who had quietly decided, one bad year at a time, that a neighbour's dignity was worth more than a hardware store's bottom line. He had never once asked for credit for it, not even from his own wife. There's more, Wendell said, on the 3rd day, tapping a page near the back. Look here, this last one's dated 8 months back. October. Delia looked. The entry was for a man named Curtis Renfro, a name she recognised vaguely, belonging to a family a few miles out past the mill. The amount crossed out was larger than most, nearly $1,100. Besides settled, in handwriting that trembled more than the earlier entries, the way Everett's hand had trembled in those last hard months, he had written something different. Ask nothing back but this. Keep the lights on till someone else can. What does that mean? Delia asked. Keep the lights on. Wendell sat back slowly. Curtis Renfro's boy runs the feed co-op out past the county line now. Small operation. Mostly seed and fertilizer. No hardware to speak of, if I had to guess. He paused, working it over. I guess your husband knew he was dying, Delia. Knew it before he told most people. And he was already thinking about who'd keep this town supplied once he was gone. Delia sat with that a long moment. The pieces were starting to fit together in a shape she hadn't let herself see yet. She hadn't wanted to see it. Seeing it meant admitting that Everett had spent his last working months not just running a store, but quietly building something to outlast it. He knew he wasn't going to be the one to reopen it, she said slowly. He was already planning for somebody else to. Man planted a garden he knew he wouldn't get to harvest, Wendell said. Some men just do that. Don't ask why, it's just who they are. That evening she called her granddaughter. She hadn't meant to, not really. She'd picked up the phone to call the pharmacy about a prescription refill, and her thumb had dialed a different number entirely, one she hadn't used in months. Not since the funeral. Not since the awkward half hour Roger's daughter Marisol had spent standing near the casket, looking like she didn't know where to put her hands. Grandma. Marisol's voice, 26 years old. Careful the way you get careful with a grandmother you haven't called enough. I want to tell you something, Delia said, about your grandfather, about the store. She told her everything. The note under the till, the false wall, the ledger, the deeds, the names in green ink going back 40 years. Marisol was quiet for a long time on the other end, long enough that Delia wondered if the call had dropped. Dad doesn't know any of this, Marisol finally said. Your father wanted to sell the building to a storage company, Delia said. For the land. He didn't ask what was inside it first. That sounds like Dad, Marisol said. There was something bitter in it. Something that told Delia this wasn't the first disappointment Marisol had swallowed where her father was concerned. Grandma, can I come see it? The store, I mean. This weekend. I would like that very much, Delia said. She found hanging up the phone that her hands were not shaking for the first time in days. Marisol arrived Saturday morning in a car that had seen better decades. She hugged her grandmother hard on the porch. She stood a long while in the stockroom, looking at the false wall Wendell had rebuilt loosely, so it could be opened and closed without more damage to the studs. He built a whole second wall, Marisol said, just to hide a toolbox. He built it to hide a decision, Delia said. The toolbox was just where he kept the proof. Marisol turned the ledger's pages slowly, reverently, the way you handle something that used to belong to someone you are only now starting to understand. This is incredible, Grandma. This is a whole life nobody knew he was living. He lived it right in front of us, Delia said. We just weren't looking at the right things. It was Marisol, 3 pages from the ledger's end, who found the entry that changed the shape of everything again. A name Delia hadn't expected, an amount larger than any other in the book. Beside it, not settled, but a different word entirely, one that made Marisol go very still and read it twice before she said anything out loud. Grandma, she said slowly. This one says paid by RHRH, Delia repeated. Whose initials are those? Marisol turned the ledger around so Delia could see it herself. The entry was dated 4 years back. The amount was $2,200, larger than any forgiveness entry in the whole book. The note beside paid by RH read, in Everett's hand, slower and more deliberate than his usual scrawl. Told him keep it between us. He didn't listen. Good boy anyway. Delia stared at the page a long moment. Then the initials rearranged themselves in her mind into a name she hadn't expected to find in that ledger at all. Roger, she said quietly. Roger Hutchins. Uncle Roger paid off somebody's debt? Marisol said. Dad? Our dad. Delia didn't answer right away. She was thinking about a man who had spent the last month trying to sell his father's store for the land underneath it. A man who'd had a realtor's sign, printed before his mother's mourning dress, came back from the cleaners. A man who had, apparently, 4 years ago, quietly paid off a struggling neighbour's debt at his father's store, and asked that it never be mentioned again. It didn't fit. And yet there it was, in Everett's own hand, plain as the rest of the ledger. "I need to talk to your father," Delia said. "Alone, before I say anything else about any of this." She called Roger that same evening. For once he answered without the bright, brittle cheer he'd carried through every conversation since the funeral. His voice sounded tired, genuinely tired, not performed. "I owe you an apology," he said before she could speak. "For Friday. For all of it, probably. Candace and I have been. It's been a hard year, Mum. The condo deposit, the job. I thought the sale would fix things faster than they're going to get fixed. That's not an excuse. I know it's not." Delia sat with the phone against her ear, the ledger open on the kitchen table in front of her. The entry marked "Paid by RH" stared up at her in her dead husband's handwriting. "Roger," she said. "4 years ago. A man named—" She checked the ledger. "Dwayne Overby. Did you pay off his account at your father's store?" The silence on the line went on long enough that Delia thought the call had dropped a second time. "Dad told you," Roger finally said. "Your father is dead, Roger," he told the ledger. "I'm the one reading it." Another long pause. When Roger spoke again, his voice had gone thin, younger somehow, like a boy caught out at something he'd spent years being proud he'd never been caught at. "Dwayne worked the loading dock with me back when I was in high school," Roger said, "before I went off to college. His wife got sick, real sick. He'd run up a tab at Dad's store he couldn't cover, cough medicine and space heaters. I don't even remember what else. Dad wasn't going to make him pay it. Obviously, that's just how Dad was. But I had some money saved from the dock job. I paid it quiet. I didn't want Dwayne knowing a 17-year-old kid covered his family's heat bill. Felt like it would embarrass him worse than owing it. Why didn't you ever tell me that?" "Because it wasn't a big deal, Mum. It was $2,000 20 years ago. It doesn't undo anything I've done since. I know how this looks. I know what kind of son sells his dead father's store, out from under his own mother, without asking." Delia looked at the ledger a long moment, at her husband's small note beside the entry. "Told him keep it between us, he didn't listen. Good boy anyway." "Your father was proud of you for that," she said quietly. "He wrote it down." She heard something on the other end that might have been Roger clearing his throat. Might have been something else. Entirely. "I'm not proud of what I did with the sign," Roger said. "Or the power of attorney thing. I convinced myself it was helping you. It wasn't. It was helping me get out from under a condo payment I shouldn't have made before the money existed to make it." "No," Delia agreed. "It wasn't helping me. Can I come see it?" "The ledger. Whatever else you found. Marisol won't stop texting me about it. She says it's the most incredible thing she's ever seen. I feel like the last person on earth who has any right to look at it. But I'd like to. If you'll let me." Delia thought about Everett's note taped under the till. "Don't sell the walls till you've swept behind them." She thought about how long it had taken her to understand that Everett had never just meant the pegboard. "Sunday," she said. "Come Sunday. Come without Candace. Just this once. This is a family conversation, and I'm not sure yet what kind of family we're going to be about it." Monday morning, before Sunday even arrived, Purcell's attorney called the store's landline. It was a number Delia hadn't expected to ring again once the register was gone. Wendell answered it, since he happened to be standing near the counter, sorting screws into coffee cans. He held the receiver out to Delia with an expression that told her the call mattered. "Mrs. Hutchins, this is Neil Aldridge. I represent Gordon Purcell." The voice was smooth, practiced. The voice of a man who made these calls often enough to have worn the awkwardness off them. "I wanted to reach out directly, given the confusion Friday. My office pulled the county records this morning. It appears your late husband did hold clear. Recorded title to parcels 411 and 412, separate from the store's parcel. That title passed to you by the terms of his will." "That's right," Delia said. "I'll be candid with you, Mrs. Hutchins. Mr. Purcell's project depends on assembling all 3 parcels into a single contiguous site. Without your 2 lots, the storage development, as designed, simply doesn't work. The setbacks don't clear. The access road doesn't fit. He'd very much like to discuss a purchase directly with you, at fair value, whenever you're ready to consider it." "I'm not selling," Delia said. "Not the lots, not the store." There was a small pause, the kind lawyers leave when they're deciding whether a client's first offer needs sweetening, or whether the conversation has already ended. "I understand this has been a difficult year," Aldridge said. If circumstances change, my office is easy to reach. They won't, Delia said, and hung up the phone the way she'd learned to hang up on telemarketers. Gentle. Final. No argument left to have. She told Wendell what Aldridge had said. Wendell nodded slowly, the way a man nods when a suspicion gets confirmed, rather than a surprise gets sprung. Purcell's whole application's dead in the water without your two lots, he said. That's worth remembering. Come whatever happens next, you're not the one who needs anything from him. He's the one who needs something from you. I don't want anything from him, Delia said. I want my husband's store open again. Wendell looked at her for a long moment, cap in his hands. Something in his weathered face shifted, the particular look of a man deciding to say a thing he's been holding back. Then let's open it, he said. Not next year. Not once the estate's settled and the lawyers have picked it clean. Now. This spring. I'll work for what I always worked for, which was mostly nothing, and the company. We could do inventory, order fresh from the same suppliers Everett always used. Half of them still remember his account number by heart. Milford Gaps had to drive 30 minutes to Corbin for a bag of nails for 8 months. Man could make a decent go of filling that gap again, pardon the town's name for the joke. Delia looked around the stockroom, at the shelves Everett built, at the pegboard hanging loose over the false wall behind it, at 76-year-old Wendell Boyce, standing there offering to work for nothing at all. A friend of 31 years had left a widow and a shuttered store, and Wendell simply couldn't stand to see either one stay closed. I'm 80 years old, Wendell. Everett was 79 the year he redid that whole east wall of shelving himself, Wendell said. Age never once stopped that man from finishing a job he started. I don't expect it'll stop you either. She didn't answer right away. She walked the length of the stockroom instead, trailing a hand along shelves gone dusty. She thought about the coffee can of silver dollars sitting now in her kitchen cupboard. She thought about Pearl Whitfield's voice on the phone. I'd like to make it right if you'll let me. She thought about a note, taped under a till, that had started as 4 confusing words, and had grown in the space of 2 weeks into something closer to a mission statement. We'd need capital, she said slowly. Inventory. A working register. Insurance. You've got near $600,000 worth of land, and forgiven debt sitting in a toolbox that says otherwise, Wendell said. Man doesn't need much to reopen a hardware store when he owns the ground under it free and clear. By Wednesday, word had gotten around Milford Gap, the way word always did, faster than any of them expected. Faster certainly than Delia had told anyone besides Wendell and Marisol, and reluctantly, her son. She suspected Pearl Whitfield of some of it, or maybe one of the other settled debt families who'd called to make things right, people who talked to each other at church and at the diner, and in line at the one gas station that hadn't shuttered, along with the mill. Whatever the source, by Wednesday afternoon, 3 more calls had come in. By Thursday, a 4th. None of them were from Purcell's attorney. They were from people whose names sat quietly in a green ledger, 40 years of them. People who had heard that Everett Hutchins's widow might reopen the store, and had decided on their own that whatever they'd once owed and never paid deserved settling now, whether or not anyone had asked. I don't want their charity, Delia told Marisol, who had started driving out from Lexington most weekends now, dropping into a rhythm of granddaughter visits that felt, to Delia, like something Everett would have loved seeing. I want the store open. That's different from wanting people to pay old debts out of guilt. Grandma, it's not guilt, Marisol said. I talked to Pearl Whitfield myself. She called the house Tuesday looking for you. She said Grandpa Everett carried her family through a winter she still can't talk about without crying. She spent 10 years wishing she had a way to pay him back that wouldn't embarrass him while he was alive. This is her chance. Let her have it. Delia thought about that for a long moment, out on the porch with the geranium she'd moved from the front window to the front counter now, closer to where the register would eventually sit again. When did you get so wise? I had a good teacher, Marisol said. 2 of them, actually. I just didn't know it until I read that ledger. Roger came Sunday alone as asked. He stood in the stockroom a long time without saying much, turning the pages of the ledger with a care that surprised his mother, given how little care he'd shown the building itself in the weeks since the funeral. He read the entry with his own initials twice. He read Curtis Renfro's entry, and the note beside it about keeping the lights on. Something in his face went soft, in a way Delia hadn't seen since he was young enough to still cry over things without embarrassment. He never once brought it up, Roger said quietly. 20 years, and he never once said a word about knowing. That was your father, Delia said. He kept scoring a book nobody was supposed to read, mostly for other people. I think near the end he started keeping it for you too. I was going to sell this place out from under both of you, Roger said. Him and you. I didn't even know I was doing it to him too, until right now. You didn't know about any of this, Delia said. None of us did. That's not an excuse for the sign, Roger, or the power of attorney. But it's the truth. Roger sat down heavily on the same overturned crate his mother had sat on 2 weeks before, the ledger open across his knees. For a long while neither of them said anything at all. The only sound was the tick of the tin roof, and somewhere out front, Wendell whistling an old hymn, while he restocked a shelf of hinges that hadn't held inventory in 8 months. I want to help, Roger finally said. Not with the money, with the reopening. If you'll let me, I've got a background in retail operations, Mum. That's literally my job. Inventory systems, supplier relationships, all of it. I could actually be useful here instead of just being the son who tried to sell it. Delia studied her son a long moment, weighing 20 years of small disappointments against one afternoon of a man finally sounding like he meant what he said. You can help, she said. But this store answers to me now. Not to Candace's spreadsheets. Not to whatever developer calls next with a bigger number. Mine and your father's. Same as it always was, until I decide otherwise. Understood, Roger said. For the first time in longer than Delia could remember, he sounded like he actually meant it. They opened the doors for a soft trial run the following Saturday. Not a grand event. Just the front sign flipped to open for the first time in 8 months. And word passed quietly through the diner and the church that Hutchins' hardware feed would take customers again, slow and small. Meanwhile, the shelves kept filling in behind it. Delia stood behind the counter that morning, in a clean apron she hadn't worn since Everett's last good year. Her hands were cutting a length of chain for a farmer named Sissy Kowalski, who needed to mend a gate before her cattle wandered onto the highway. The motion came back to her before her mind fully caught up, muscle memory older than the grief that had almost buried it. Didn't think I'd see these doors open again, Sissy said, counting out exact change onto the counter. $4.12, the kind of small, honest transaction that hadn't happened in this building in 8 months. Everett fixed my daddy's tractor more times than I could count, never did charge full price if the year had been dry. He kept a book on that too, Delia said. She found she could say it now without her voice catching, the way it still had the first few times. I'd imagine he kept a book on most of this county, Sissy said, and left with her chain and a nod that carried more weight than the words themselves. It was later that same afternoon, restocking a low shelf of hand tools that had sat mostly untouched since the funeral, that Wendell found the second discovery. Smaller than the toolbox, but strange enough to stop him cold in the middle of the aisle, tucked behind a row of hammers on the bottom shelf, wedged where a careless hand would never think to look, sat a cigar box, unmarked, dust thick across its lid. Delia, he called, come look at this. Inside the cigar box, beneath a folded shop rag, lay a stack of photographs, black and white gone soft brown with age. Beside them sat a second smaller notebook, spiral-bound, cheap, the kind sold 2 for $1 at any drugstore. Delia sat down right there on an overturned bucket to look through it. The photographs first. Everett as a young man she barely recognised, standing in front of the same building decades younger. The tin awning bright and unrusted. A much older man beside him she didn't know at all. Who's that? She asked, holding the photo up for Wendell to see. Wendell studied it a long moment, then let out a low breath. That's old man Dutton. Silas Dutton. Ran this store before Everett ever did. Way back. Sold it to Everett dirt cheap in 1974, if the stories I heard growing up were true. Silas didn't have any children of his own to leave it to. Took a shine to a young man who worked hard and didn't complain. The spiral notebook, when Delia opened it, held Everett's earliest handwriting. Younger, steadier, less cramped than the ledger's later pages. On the first page, dated the same year as the photograph, a short entry read simply, Silas says a store's not really yours till you've given more out of it than you ever took. Going to try and be the kind of man he thinks I already am. Delia held the notebook a long moment. The photograph of a young Everett Hutchins, standing proud in front of a store he'd only just inherited from a stranger's kindness. She understood then, with a fullness that nearly took her breath, exactly where the green ledger had come from, exactly why a man had spent 50 years quietly forgiving debts nobody asked him to forgive. He didn't invent it, she said softly. He learned it. From a man who wasn't even family. That's how the good ones usually come by it, Wendell said. Somebody shows them first and they spend the rest of their life trying to be worth what they were shown. She kept the cigar box on the shelf behind the register, alongside the coffee can of silver dollars, close enough to reach, far enough from the customer's hands. A second small monument beside the first. Closing the store that evening, she thought that Everett's real inheritance had never been a single hidden wall or a single hidden ledger. It had been a whole life built in layers, each one waiting patiently for someone willing to keep looking. The trouble, when it came again, came from Purcell, and it came faster than any of them expected. A certified letter arrived at the house on Sourwood Ridge Road the following Tuesday. Thick cream paper, a law firm's letterhead Delia didn't recognise. Inside it, a notice. Gordon Purcell's development company had filed a petition with the County Planning Commission, requesting an eminent domain review of parcels 410, 411, and 412 on the grounds that consolidating the block for commercial redevelopment served a documented public benefit to Milford Gap's tax base and infrastructure. Delia read it twice at the kitchen table, then a third time, her hand steady even as the words themselves seemed to swim a little. "He can't do that," Marisol said when Delia called her that evening and read the letter aloud. "Eminent domain is for roads, Grandma, for schools, for actual public projects. Not so some guy can build storage units for people's old furniture." "That's what the letter says he's arguing," Delia said. "Public benefit. Jobs, tax revenue, blight remediation. It says right here, blight." "Blight?" Marisol's voice climbed half an octave. "It's a hardware store, not a crack house. It's been closed 8 months and looks it," Delia said quietly. "I imagine that's exactly the argument he intends to make." She called Odell Farrow the next morning. Odell, though not a lawyer himself, gave her the name of one, a woman named Sylvia Marsh, who practiced land use and probate out of an office above the pharmacy in the county seat. 60 years old, sharp-eyed, the kind of small-town attorney who'd spent 30 years watching developers try exactly this kind of manoeuvre on exactly this kind of family. "It's a long shot for him," Sylvia told Delia, in an office that smelled of old paper and burnt coffee. The deeds and the ledger spread across her desk between them. Blight petitions for private commercial redevelopment almost never survive a hearing when the property owner is actively occupying and improving the site, which you can show you are, given what I understand you're about to do with this store. But a long shot isn't no shot, Mrs. Hutchins. Purcell clearly has the resources to make you spend money and time fighting it, even if he loses in the end. That's often the whole strategy. Wear the little guy down. "I'm not wearing down," Delia said. Sylvia looked at her over her reading glasses, the same slow, assessing look Odell had given her weeks before. Something like respect crossed her face. "No," she said. "I don't imagine you are. The commission set a hearing date, 3 weeks from Thursday at the courthouse annex. I'd like you to have this store visibly reopened. Inventory on the shelves before that date. Nothing undercuts a blight argument faster than a business actually open and serving customers. 3 weeks. Delia drove home from that meeting doing arithmetic in her head the whole way. Supplier accounts, shelf inventory. A register that would need replacing. She thought about 76-year-old Wendell Boyce and whatever help Roger could actually deliver on his promise. 3 weeks had sounded like plenty of time, until she started counting everything that needed doing inside it. She called Wendell that night. 3 weeks, she told him. Sylvia says we need the doors open and shelves stocked before the hearing, or Purcell's blight argument gets easier to make. Then we've got 3 weeks, Wendell said, like it was the simplest fact in the world. I'll call the suppliers tomorrow. Half of them still have Everett's account number in their system. I bet money on it. Nobody deletes a 50-year account just because the man attached to it passed. He was right. The hardware distributor out of Louisville, the one that had supplied Hutchins' hardware feed since before Roger was born, still had Everett's account active. Dormant, but active. The woman on the phone, once she understood who was calling and why, cried a little before she pulled up the order history. She started rebuilding a standing order from scratch. Same brands, same quantities, same seasonal rotation Everett had followed for decades, adjusted now for a spring reopening. Roger, true to his word, threw himself into the operational side with an energy that surprised his mother more than she let on. He drove to Lexington and came back with a used but functioning register system. Cheaper than new, more than adequate for a small-town hardware store's needs. He built out a basic inventory spreadsheet, the kind of thing his corporate job had trained him to produce without thinking. He cross-referenced it against Everett's old supplier invoices, rebuilding a picture of exactly what Hutchins' hardware feed had carried in its best years. Dad never used anything more sophisticated than a paper ledger for 40 years, Roger said one evening, looking at his own spreadsheet with something like sheepish pride. I feel like I'm defacing a historical monument. Your father would have loved not having to do the math by hand, Delia said. He complained about arithmetic more than he ever complained about anything else in that store. Candace did not come to help. She did not call either. Delia noticed the absence without commenting on it, the way you notice a missing tooth with your tongue, an ache that's mostly just strange rather than sharp. Roger mentioned once, carefully, that things were tense at home. Candace had been counting on the sale money more than either of them had admitted out loud. The condo deposit sat now like a debt neither of them knew how to unwind. That's between you and Candace, Delia said. I won't pretend I have room to fix your marriage on top of everything else. But I'll say this. Whatever's tense at your house, it doesn't get solved by selling your father's store. I know that now, Roger said. I'm not sure I knew it 3 weeks ago. Word of the reopening spread through Milford Gap, faster than the eminent domain petition had. Faster even than the original rumour of the store's closing. Pearl Whitfield came by with 2 of her grandchildren to help wipe down shelves. A retired schoolteacher named Otis Vance, whose name Delia recognised from the ledger's earliest pages, showed up one Saturday with a truck full of scrap lumber. He spent a full day repairing the porch steps that had gone soft with rot. He refused payment. He refused even lunch. He said only that Everett had fixed his roof once during a bad ice storm and never sent a bill. That's 3 now, Wendell said, watching Otis drive away that evening. 3 from the ledger, showing up on their own, doing work instead of just handing over money. Words getting around about more than just the reopening, Delia. Words getting around about what kind of man your husband really was. He was always that kind of man, Delia said. The rest of us just didn't have the whole picture. 2 weeks before the hearing, with the shelves half restocked, the new register installed, and a fresh coat of paint drying on the old tin awning, Purcell himself came by the store. Alone this time. No assistant, no tablet. Dressed down, in a way that made him look less like a developer and more like an ordinary man standing on an ordinary porch. I didn't come to make trouble, he said when Delia met him at the door, Wendell close behind her with a paint roller still in one hand, ready for trouble regardless of what Purcell had come to make. I came to say, I've reconsidered pushing the blight petition. My attorney thinks it's a weak case now that the store's clearly active again. Honestly, Mrs. Hutchins, watching this town rally around reopening it, I think he's right. I think I misjudged what I was buying into in the first place. You mean what you were trying to buy, Delia said. Not unkindly, but not softly either. Purcell had the grace to look a little abashed. Yes, that's fair. I saw a lot on paper with good bones and a family that seemed ready to sell. I didn't look hard enough at what the family actually wanted or what the building actually meant to this town. I do that a lot, professionally. It's usually fine. This time it wasn't. Why tell me this? Delia asked. Instead of just letting the hearing happen and losing quietly? Because my attorney's going to withdraw the petition regardless, Purcell said, and I'd rather tell you myself than have you hear it secondhand and assume I'm planning something worse. I'm not. I'm moving my project to the old mill lot alone if the numbers work without your parcels. They probably won't. Not the way I designed it. I may just walk away from Milford Gap altogether. He paused. For what it's worth, I hope the reopening goes well. I mean that. I don't often get corrected this thoroughly, Mrs. Hutchins. It's been educational. He left without asking for anything further. Delia stood on the porch a long moment after his truck pulled away. Wendell beside her, paint roller dripping faintly onto a drop cloth. Neither of them had thought to move. Well, Wendell said. That's one thing off the list. One thing, Delia agreed. The hearing's still on the calendar, though. Sylvia says we go regardless. Get it formally dismissed on the record so nobody tries this again in 6 months under a different name. Then we go, Wendell said, and we make sure everybody in that room understands exactly what they nearly bulldozed. She thought, that night, about the note still folded small in her cardigan pocket. Softer now from handling, the ink starting to fade at the crease. Don't sell the walls till you've swept behind them. So much had happened since she'd first read those words and understood nothing they meant. So much she understood now that she hadn't dared to hope for 3 weeks before. A reopened store, a returning son, a granddaughter who called just to talk, a whole quiet network of neighbours settling old debts nobody had asked them to settle. She did not yet know what would happen at the hearing, but for the first time since November, Delia Hutchins fell asleep without the particular hollow ache that had followed her to bed every night since the funeral. She woke the next morning already thinking about paint colours for the front window trim, a small ordinary thing, the kind of thing a woman thinks about when she has started, again, to believe in a future. Sylvia Marsh called 2 days later with news that undid some of that peace. Purcell's withdrawn his own attorney's involvement, she said. But the petition itself hasn't been formally withdrawn because it turns out it was never technically his to withdraw alone. Mrs. Hutchins, I need you to listen carefully to this part. The original filing named Roger Hutchins as a co-petitioner, not just as a witness or an interested party. Co-petitioner. That means the County Planning Commission still has an active blight review on the docket with your son's name on it, requesting reclassification of parcels 410, 411 and 412. Purcell backing away doesn't kill the petition. Only a formal withdrawal filed by every named petitioner does that, or a commission ruling. Delia sat down slowly at the kitchen table. Roger filed something. When? According to the paperwork 6 weeks ago, before the reopening. Before, I'd guess, most of what's happened since. Sylvia's voice softened slightly. I don't say this to reopen a wound, Mrs. Hutchins. I say it because you need to know exactly what's still live going into that hearing room. Whatever your son's intentions are now, his name is still on a document asking the county to declare your property blighted so it can be redeveloped. If he doesn't formally withdraw that filing, on the record, in front of the commission, the petition proceeds regardless of what Purcell wants. Delia called Roger that same evening. The ledger sat closed now on the kitchen table beside her. The coffee can of silver dollars sat nearby, like a silent witness to whatever conversation was about to happen. Sylvia says you're a co-petitioner, she said, without preamble. On the blight filing. 6 weeks ago, Roger. Before any of this, before Purcell even walked the lot. The silence on the line went on long enough that Delia understood, before he said a word, that this was worse than the sign, worse than the power of attorney, worse than anything he'd already confessed to and apologised for. Candace found the process, Roger finally said, his voice low. A consultant she knew from her old real estate job said if we could get the county to reclassify the property as blighted before probate closed, it would clear the path for a faster sale, better terms, no messy negotiation over what the land was really worth. I signed the petition paperwork before I ever brought Purcell to walk the lot. I thought, he stopped, I thought it would just move things along. I didn't think about what it actually meant. I didn't think about you having to stand in a hearing room while the county decided whether your husband's store counted as blight. You didn't think about a lot of things, Roger. No, he said. I didn't. And I know saying I've changed my mind since doesn't erase a document with my name on it filed before I had any reason to change it. Mum, I'll withdraw it. Today, if Sylvia tells me how. I should have done it the day after Purcell walked away. I just didn't know it was still active. I swear to you I didn't know. Then you'll come to the hearing, Delia said, and you'll say that, in that room in front of whoever's sitting on that commission. Not to me, privately, over the phone. There, where it matters. I'll be there, Roger said. Mum, I am sorry. I know that word's worn thin between us by now. I'm still going to keep saying it until it means something again. Then start proving it Thursday, Delia said. Hanging up the phone for once, she did not feel the particular ache she'd carried through every conversation with her son since the funeral. She felt something closer to cautious hope, the kind that comes not from being told a thing will be fixed, but from watching someone actually begin fixing it. Candace came to the store the next afternoon, alone. the first time she'd set foot on the property since the day Purcell's truck pulled away for good. She stood just inside the door, the bell still swinging faintly behind her. She looked at the fresh paint on the shelves, the new register, the coffee can of silver dollars sitting in plain view behind the counter, before she said anything at all. "I heard about the co-petitioner filing," she said. "Roger told me it was my idea." "He told me," Delia said, not unkindly, setting down the box of nails she'd been sorting. "I wasn't going to ask you here to talk about it, Candace. You came on your own. I wanted to say it myself, not have Roger say it for me." Candace's hands were tight around the strap of her purse, the careful posture of someone bracing for a fight she'd already decided to have, regardless. "I found the blight process because I was scared, Delia. Scared of the condo payment, scared of Roger's job feeling shakier every quarter, scared that if we didn't move fast on the sale, we'd lose everything we'd already put down. I didn't think about what the petition actually meant. I thought about numbers. I'm good at numbers. I'm not always good at people." "You could have just asked me for help," Delia said, "instead of trying to take the decision away from me entirely. I know that now." Candace looked around the store again, at Wendell working a back shelf, at the framed photograph Marisol had already started assembling for the eventual reopening. "For what it's worth, I'm not going to fight the withdrawal. I told Roger's lawyer this morning I want no part of the filing going forward, if that means anything coming from me." "It means something," Delia said. "It doesn't undo 6 weeks. But it means something." Candace nodded once, sharp, the way she did when a conversation had reached the limit of what she was prepared to say out loud. She turned to leave, then stopped at the door, her hand on the frame. "He's different since he started coming here," she said, not quite looking at Delia. "Roger. Softer maybe. I don't know if that's good for us. I don't know a lot of things right now. But I wanted you to know. I see it too." She left before Delia could answer, the bell ringing once behind her. Delia stood a long moment at the counter. Whatever came of Roger and Candace's marriage, it was not hers to fix. But Candace showing up at all, unasked to say even that much, counted for something in a ledger nobody would ever write down. The 3 days before the hearing passed in a blur of last details. Wendell rebuilt the last section of shelving Everett had never finished, 3 days before he died, a section meant for garden tools that had sat half-framed and covered in a tarp since November. Marisol drove in Wednesday night and stayed at the house. She insisted on coming to the hearing herself. She wanted to see, with her own eyes, whatever happened to the store that had somehow taught her more about her grandfather in 3 weeks than 26 years of holiday dinners ever had. Sylvia Marsh met with Delia one final time the evening before, laying out exactly how the hearing would run. The commission would hear Purcell's original filing first, then any co-petitioner statements, then public comment, then a ruling, either that day or reserved for a later written decision. She recommended Delia bring the deeds, the ledger, and Wendell as a character witness who could speak to Everett's history in the community and the store's ongoing occupancy and improvement. "One more thing," Sylvia said, closing her folder. "I understand from the clerk's office that several Milford Gap residents have asked to be added to the public comment list. People named in your ledger, apparently. Word travels in a town that size. I don't know exactly what they intend to say, but I'd let them say it. Sometimes the best argument a lawyer can make is to simply step back and let a room full of ordinary people tell the truth out loud." Delia thought about Pearl Whitfield, about Otis Vance and his truckload of scrap lumber, about Curtis Renfro's son running the feed co-op 30 minutes off, about 60 or 70 names in a green ledger who had spent 4 decades quietly being cared for by a man who never once asked for thanks. Standing in Sylvia's office with the deeds folded under her arm, she understood that whatever happened Thursday, she would not be walking into that hearing room alone. Thursday morning came up grey and cool, a thin rain falling that Everett would have called good weather for planting. Delia dressed carefully, her one good coat, her mother's brooch pinned at the collar. The deeds and the ledger went into a leather satchel that had been Everett's. The coffee can of silver dollars stayed home this time, safe in the cupboard, because some things, she'd decided, belonged at the store and not in a courthouse annex full of strangers. Wendell drove her in his own truck, Cap on the seat between them. Quiet the whole ride. The kind of quiet that comes before something a man has been waiting a long time to say. Marisol followed behind in her own car. Roger met them in the parking lot, alone. No Candice, dressed in the same dark suit he'd worn to his father's funeral. Something about that choice, deliberate or not, struck Delia as exactly right. The courthouse annex hearing room was smaller than Delia expected. Fluorescent lit. Rows of grey plastic chairs half filled already by the time they arrived. Delia recognised, scattered through those rows, more faces from the ledger than she'd dared to hope would come. Pearl Whitfield sat near the front, her hands folded in her lap. Otis Vance sat 2 rows back, still in his work clothes, like he'd come straight from a job site to make sure he didn't miss the start. Curtis Renfro's son, a man in his 30s Delia had never actually met, sat near the aisle. When their eyes met, he gave her a small, solemn nod, the kind that said, without words, "I know what your husband did for my family, and I am here because of it." The commission chair, a heavy-set man named Grissom, who ran the county extension office on weekdays, called the room to order at 9 sharp. He read the petition into the record. The parcel numbers, the blight designation request, the names of the petitioners, Gordon Purcell and Roger Hutchins, filed 6 weeks prior. "Is Mr. Purcell present?" Grissom asked. A man near the back, not Purcell himself but a junior associate from his firm, stood. He stated for the record that Gordon Purcell was formally withdrawing all interest in the petition. His development plans had been redirected to a different site. He took no further position on the matter before the commission, and the co-petitioner, Roger Hutchins. Roger stood, his hands visibly unsteady at his sides. Delia watched her son cross the small distance to the podium at the front of the room. She watched him grip its edges, the way a man grips something to keep from swaying. "I'm Roger Hutchins," he said, his voice carrying further than Delia expected in the small room. "I signed this petition 6 weeks ago, believing it would speed the sale of my late father's property. I want to withdraw my name from it formally, on the record today, and I want to say, in front of this room, that I was wrong to file it in the first place. My father built that store with his own hands over 50 years. My mother has spent the last month reopening it, restocking it, and rebuilding relationships with this community that I very nearly sold out from, under both of them. There is no version of blight that describes a business my mother is actively running with the help of half this town. I asked the commission to dismiss the petition entirely, and I apologise to my mother, in front of everyone here, for ever putting her in the position of having to answer for it." He sat down. The room was very quiet. Delia felt Wendell's hand, briefly, cover hers where it rested on the leather satchel. She understood it as the only comment he intended to make out loud, a squeeze of the hand instead of a word. It said everything a word might have. Grissom looked over his glasses at the room. "We'll take public comment before moving to a vote," he said. "Anyone wishing to speak, please come to the podium." Pearl Whitfield stood first. "My name is Pearl Whitfield," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "In 2009, my husband lost his job at the plant in Somerset, and we couldn't heat our house that winter. Everett Hutchins carried our account at that store for 4 months and never once asked me for a dollar of it. When I finally had the money to pay him, he told me not to worry on it. I found out 3 weeks ago, reading a ledger his widow showed half this town, that he wrote my name down as settled and never told a soul. Not even his own wife. That is not a man who ran a blighted business. That is a man who ran the most decent business in this county, and I am asking you to leave his widow alone to keep running it." She sat down to a silence that felt to Delia less like courtroom decorum and more like a held breath. Otis Vance stood next, work boots still muddy from whatever job he'd left to be there. "Everett Hutchins fixed my roof during the ice storm of '04 and never sent a bill," he said, plain and short. "I came here today to fix his porch steps instead. Free, same as he'd have wanted it. That store's not blight. That store's the only reason half this town made it through some hard winters. I'd ask you to remember that before you vote." Curtis Renfro's son spoke third. His voice was rougher, younger, carrying a weight Delia hadn't expected from a man she'd never met. "My father's name is in that ledger too," he said. "I run the feed co-op out past the county line now. Been doing it 4 years. I never once understood why my father insisted I learn the hardware side of the business too, alongside seed and fertilizer, until 3 weeks ago. Mrs. Hutchins told me what her husband wrote next to my father's name. Keep the lights on till someone else can. He knew he was dying. He was already planning for this town not to go without. I'd like the record to reflect that a man who plans that far ahead for people he isn't related to is not a man whose life's work deserves to be called blight. Grissom let the room sit with that a long moment before he spoke again. Is there anyone else who'd like to be heard? Wendell Boyce stood, cap in hand, and walked to the podium. It was the particular deliberate steadiness of a man who has rehearsed nothing and needs to rehearse nothing. Because what he is about to say has been true for 31 years. Name's Wendell Boyce, he said. Drove delivery for Everett Hutchins for 31 years. I want the commission to see something if you'll permit it. He set the leather satchel Delia had carried in on the podium. With her small nod of permission, he opened it and lifted out the deeds first, laying them flat under the fluorescent light. These are recorded county deeds, parcels 411 and 412, purchased and held free and clear by Everett Hutchins, passed by will to his widow, Delia Hutchins, upon his death. Not Roger Hutchins, not Gordon Purcell. Delia Hutchins sitting right there. He gestured. Every head in the room turned to look at her. Delia sat very straight in her one good coat, her mother's brooch at her collar, and did not look away from any of them. Wendell lifted the green ledger next, its cloth cover soft with age, and held it up so the room could see the weight of it, 4 decades thick. And this, he said, is Everett Hutchins's own record, in his own hand, of 60-some accounts he quietly forgave, over 40 years, never once asking to be repaid, never once telling his own wife what he'd done. Half this room's names are written in here. I expect that's no accident that half this room showed up today. He set the ledger down beside the deeds. For a moment the room was so quiet, Delia could hear the rain still falling faintly against the annex's tin roof. An echo, she thought, of a roof 30 miles away that Everett had built with his own 2 hands. This isn't blight, Wendell said, his voice steady, carrying to every corner of the small room. This is the opposite of blight. This is 50 years of one man deciding, over and over, that this town mattered more than his own bottom line. And his widow standing up at 80 years old to finish what he started. I'd ask you to vote accordingly. Grissom looked at the deeds, at the ledger, at the room full of names written inside it. Then at Delia herself, sitting straight-backed in the second row. Mrs. Hutchins, he said, would you like to add anything to the record before we vote? Delia stood, smoothed her coat, and walked to the podium herself, the room's eyes following her the whole short distance. Standing there, she felt not fear, not grief, but something closer to the quiet certainty she'd felt the night she pried a pegboard off a stockroom wall and found a whole second wall waiting behind it. My husband built that store with his hands, she said. He also built, without telling me, a hidden compartment behind a pegboard in the stockroom. Inside it, he kept the real ledger of his life's work, not what people owed him, what he'd forgiven them. I found it 3 weeks ago, alone in the dark, prying at a wall, because he left me a note that made no sense until I did. I have spent every day since honouring what that note asked of me. I'm not going to stop now because a petition got filed before anybody understood what they were petitioning to destroy. I'd ask you to dismiss it and let an old woman finish reopening her husband's store. She sat back down. Grissom conferred briefly, quietly, with the 2 other commission members flanking him. Then he straightened his papers. The commission moves to dismiss the blight petition on parcels 410, 411, and 412, in full effective immediately, he said. All in favour? 3 hands rose. Not one dissented. The room did not erupt, not the way rooms do in movies. It simply exhaled. All at once, a small town's worth of relief, let out in a single collective breath. Pearl Whitfield reached over 2 rows to squeeze Delia's shoulder. Otis Vance nodded once, satisfied, like a man watching a job finally get finished right. Marisol, sitting beside her grandmother, was openly crying, and did not seem to mind who saw it. Roger crossed the room afterward. He found his mother still seated. He knelt beside her chair the way he hadn't knelt beside anything since he was a boy, asking forgiveness for some small childhood wrong. I'm proud of you, he said. I don't know that I've earned the right to say that yet, but I am. You said it in front of the room, Roger, Delia said. That's the part that mattered, not whether you'd earned it yet. Outside, the thin rain had stopped. A pale sun worked its way through the clouds over the courthouse parking lot. Delia stood a long moment on the annex steps with her husband's leather satchel under her arm, the deeds and the ledger safe inside it. Whatever else happened now, whatever else there was left to build, The hardest part was already finished. The part that had required a crowbar and a dark stockroom, and 80 years of quiet endurance. The crowd lingered in the courthouse annex parking lot, longer than hearings usually kept people. Small clusters of neighbours trading the kind of talk that follows a thing everyone half expected, but still felt lucky to see land right. Pearl Whitfield found Delia by her car and hugged her without asking first. The quick, fierce hug of a woman who'd waited weeks to do it. "I hope you know what you did in there today," Pearl said. "Not just for yourself. For every one of us whose name is in that book." "Everett did it," Delia said. 40 years before any of us knew we'd need it. I just carried the book into the room. "Sometimes carrying the book is the hardest part," Pearl said, and squeezed her hand once before letting her go. Sylvia Marsh caught up with Delia near the annex steps, folder already tucked back under one arm. She had the brisk, satisfied look of a lawyer who'd watched a case go exactly the way she'd hoped, without having to argue half of it herself. "I've seen commissions dismiss weaker petitions with a lot more fuss," Sylvia said. "You didn't need me in there today, Mrs. Hutchins." That room did the work on its own. "You got us to the room," Delia said. "That counts for plenty." Roger waited by his car a little apart from the others. When Delia walked over, he didn't say anything at first. He just opened his arms. Delia let herself be hugged by her son in a courthouse parking lot, the way she hadn't let herself be hugged by him in longer than either of them would likely admit out loud. "I meant what I said in there," he said quietly into her shoulder. "Every word." "I know you did," Delia said. "That's why I let you say it in front of everybody, instead of just to me." The county recorder's office confirmed the dismissal on the books within the week. A clean procedural notation, entered against parcels 410, 411, and 412. No blight designation. No further review pending. A small bureaucratic footnote. It would mean nothing to a stranger flipping through county records. It meant everything to the woman who'd stood in that hearing room and refused to let a lifetime get called worthless. Purcell's development company filed 2 weeks later a notice relocating its storage unit project to a parcel outside Somerset. A plain administrative letter, arrived without ceremony and without further comment. Delia read it once, filed it in the store's fireproof safe beside the deeds, and did not think about it again. The settled debt payments kept coming for a month after the hearing. Smaller amounts mostly, $40 here, $60 there. People who'd heard the story secondhand and wanted their own small piece of making it right. Delia finally stood up one Sunday at the little church out past the mill and asked gently that anyone still wishing to repay an old kindness consider instead buying their next bag of nails or box of seed at Hutchins' hardware feed. Full price, no discount asked or given. That, she said, was the only repayment Everett would ever have actually wanted. The total, when Sylvia Marsh finally helped her tally everything for the estate's final accounting, came to $581,000. It counted the 2 lots at fair market value, the coin collection appraised by a dealer out of Lexington who'd driven out special just to see it, and the settled debt repayments that had come in unasked. Delia read the number once, folded the paper, and put it in the same drawer as Everett's note. The number was proof of something, she'd decided. But it had never once been the point. Roger and Candace separated that summer, quietly, without the drama Delia had half expected, given how tightly Candace had wound herself around the sale that never happened. Roger moved into a small rental 2 streets over from the store. He took a reduced role at his Lexington job, so he could spend 3 days a week actually working the counter, alongside his mother and Wendell. He learned inventory the old-fashioned way, by handling it, by knowing which regular customer needed which size bolt without being told. He was not, Delia thought, watching him ring up a sale for old Otis Vance one Tuesday afternoon. Entirely redeemed. She did not think a man got entirely redeemed in a single season. But he was trying, visibly, daily, in a way that mattered more to her than any single grand gesture could have. "Your father would have liked watching you learn this," she told him one evening, after closing, the two of them sweeping the front aisle together, the way she and Wendell used to do alone. "I wish he'd had the chance to teach me himself," Roger said, "instead of you having to do it second-hand out of a store he half hid from both of us." "He didn't hide the store," Delia said. "He hid the proof of what the store meant. There's a difference. He was teaching you the whole time, Roger. You just weren't looking at the right things yet." Marisol told her father about the job offer over dinner one Sunday. The marketing firm in Lexington. Good salary, good title. The kind of offer a 26-year-old was supposed to take without a second thought. Roger, to his own visible surprise, found himself asking a question he wouldn't have thought to ask a year earlier. "Is it what you actually want?" he said, "or just what looks right on paper?" Marisol considered that a long moment, turning her fork over in her hand. "I keep thinking about Grandma's ledger," she said, "about how Grandpa built something that mattered more than what it paid. I don't think I want a marketing job that looks right on paper, Dad. I think I want to be part of something like that, even if it's smaller. Even if Grandma's going to boss me around about inventory counts." "She will," Roger said. "She bosses me around about them daily." "Good," Marisol said. "I could use the practice." She turned the job down the following week. Delia overheard about it secondhand from Roger and didn't comment on it directly. But she found an excuse that same evening to hand Marisol the keys to the store's back office, the desk Everett had used for paperwork for 50 years. She said only, "You'll want better lighting in here eventually. Your grandfather never did fix that overhead fixture." Marisol finished her degree that fall. To nobody's great surprise, except perhaps her own father's, she turned down the marketing job to help run the store's books, and eventually its slowly growing online presence, a small website where Milford Gap's scattered former residents could order feed and hardware shipped out to wherever they'd ended up. She kept a framed photocopy of the ledger's first page on the wall behind the new register, Everett's handwriting preserved under glass. A reminder, she said, of exactly what kind of business this had always actually been. Wendell never did take a real paycheck, not in the way the word usually meant. He took instead what he'd always taken from Everett, a modest hourly wage that Delia insisted on paying whether he asked for it or not, and the steady, uncomplicated satisfaction of showing up every day to a store that needed him. He finished the last section of garden tool shelving Everett had left half-framed. He gave it the same care he'd have given it if Everett were standing right beside him critiquing the joints. He never once mentioned, afterward, how long he'd waited to finish that particular job. The town threw a proper reopening celebration in June. Pearl Whitfield's idea originally, seconded fast by half the church and most of the diner regulars. A Saturday afternoon with folding tables set up in the gravel lot. A banner Marisol had made stretched across the tin awning, reading Hutchins Hardware Feed, serving Milford Gap since 1974. Enough casseroles and pound cakes to feed the whole county twice over. Delia stood on the porch steps Otis Vance had repaired for free, in a blue dress she hadn't worn since before Everett got sick. She watched the gravel lot fill with people she'd known her whole life, and a handful she was only now learning the names of. Curtis Renfro's son stood near the punch bowl, with his own 2 children, pointing out the store to them like it mattered that they understood what it was. "Speech, Delia," Pearl called out, and the crowd took up the call good-naturedly, until Delia relented, climbing one step higher so she could be seen over the folding tables. "I'm not much for speeches," she said, and the crowd laughed warmly, because everyone there had known Everett well enough to know the whole family shared that particular trait. "I'll just say this. My husband spent 50 years running this store like it belonged to this town more than it belonged to him. I didn't understand that until after he was gone. I understand it now. This store is open again because a lot of you showed up. When you didn't have to, the way Everett always did for you. That's the only speech I've got. Come get some cake before Otis eats it all." The crowd laughed again. Otis, cake plate already in hand, raised it good-naturedly in mock offence. The afternoon rolled on unhurried, the way small-town afternoons do. Children chased each other between the folding tables. Old men argued gently about high school football scores 40 years gone. Wendell manned a grill someone had hauled in off a truck bed, refusing as always to let anyone pay him for the work. Roger found his mother near the geranium, now permanently repotted on the front counter, where every customer could see it. He stood beside her a while without speaking, watching the crowd the way a man watches something he's afraid to admit he almost lost. "Candace won't come to things like this anymore," he said quietly. "I don't blame her, not really. I think she needed the sale to mean something different than it turned out to mean. I think some part of her is still angry it didn't." "Are you angry?" Delia asked. "I was," Roger admitted. "For about a week. Now mostly I'm just grateful you didn't let me finish what I started." He watched Marisol laughing with a group of townspeople near the punch bowl, easy and unguarded in a way he hadn't seen his daughter look in years. She's happier here than she ever was in Lexington. I think I finally understand why. It's not the town, Delia said. Not only the town anyway, it's knowing what you're part of. That's worth more than a marketing salary most days. By late summer, Hutchins' hardware feed had settled into a rhythm Delia hadn't dared imagine the day Roger's realtor sign arrived glossy and confident in the mail. The bell over the door rang steadily now. All day. Customers came for nails and seed, and the particular kind of small-town conversation that only happens in a store where the person behind the counter has known your family for 3 generations. The old radio, replaced, picked up the gospel station out of Corbin again, playing low behind the register the way it always had. Delia kept the coffee can of silver dollars on a shelf behind the counter. Not locked away. Not hidden. Simply present. A small, quiet monument that customers sometimes asked about. Delia answered honestly every time, telling the story short and plain. A hidden wall, a green ledger, 50 years of a marriage that still had rooms left to discover, even after one half of it was gone. Wendell took to training a new part-time hire that fall, a shy 19-year-old named Dustin Farrow, Odell's grandnephew. He'd shown up asking for work after hearing his great-uncle talk about the hearing at Sunday dinner, one too many times. Wendell taught him the way Everett had once taught Wendell, patient and unhurried, showing rather than telling. Delia watched the two of them from behind the register some afternoons, an old man and a young one bent together over a broken lawnmower engine. Whatever else the store had become, it was still doing the one thing it had always done best, teaching somebody younger how to be useful and how to be decent, usually at the same time. "You planning on retiring anytime soon, Wendell?" she asked him once, not entirely joking. "Everett never did," Wendell said. "Don't see why I ought to start a habit he never had the patience for." Sissy Kowalski became a regular that fall too, stopping in most weeks for feed and the occasional length of fence wire. It was Sissy who first suggested, almost offhand, that the store host a small seed swap each spring, the way some of the co-ops over in Somerset did, neighbours trading extra seedlings and cuttings instead of buying everything new. Delia liked the idea enough to say yes on the spot. By the following March, the gravel lot filled twice more, smaller than the reopening crowd but steady, the kind of gathering that had every sign of becoming a Milford Gap tradition rather than a one-time event. Dustin Farrow turned out to have a steady hand with small engines. Better than Wendell's own at that age, Wendell admitted, though only once, and only to Delia. By spring the boy could rebuild a lawnmower carburetor blindfolded. He'd started keeping his own small notebook of customer names and quirks, tucked in his back pocket, the way Everett once kept his. Nobody had told him to do that. He'd simply watched long enough to understand it was how the store worked. He asked Delia once if Everett had ever written his own name down in the green ledger. She told him no, and that was the whole point of a man like that. On the 1-year anniversary of Everett's death, Delia closed the store early, just for that afternoon. She drove out with Roger, Marisol, and Wendell to the small cemetery on the ridge above Sourwood Ridge Road, where Everett's plain granite marker sat beneath an old oak he'd have approved of for the shade alone. She brought the framed photograph Marisol had made from the store's reopening day. The whole town gathered on the porch, the open sign glowing fresh behind them, and set it gently against the base of the stone. "You could have just told me," she said, standing there in the late afternoon light, Roger and Marisol a respectful few steps back, Wendell beside her with his cap in his hands, the way it always was in moments that mattered. "About the lots, the ledger, any of it. I would have understood, Everett. I would have loved you for it exactly the same, maybe more." The wind moved through the oak's branches, ordinary and indifferent, the way wind always is. No answer came, because none ever did, not from a granite stone on a quiet ridge. But Delia found standing there that she did not need an answer anymore. She had spent a year finding it herself, one bored, pried loose at a time. She understood now, in a way she hadn't understood the night she first read his note by flashlight, that Everett had never meant to leave her a mystery. He had meant to leave her a door. He had trusted her, after 50 years together, to be exactly the kind of woman who would open it. Back at the store the next morning, Delia unlocked the front door herself, same as she had every day since the reopening. The bell rang clean and bright, the way it had rung since 1974, The way it would keep ringing, she intended, for as long as her hands could still turn a key. She flipped the sign in the window from closed to open. She moved the geranium an inch to catch the morning light better. She stood a moment behind the counter her husband had built with his own 2 hands, waiting, unhurried, for the first customer of the day. It was Otis Vance, same as most mornings now, come in for a box of nails he didn't strictly need yet, but liked to have on hand. He set his money on the counter, plain and simple. No ledger entry required this time. No debt to forgive. Just an ordinary sale between 2 people who understood exactly what this small brick building on Depot Street had always been worth, long before anyone thought to write it down. "Morning, Delia," he said. "Morning, Otis," she said, and rang him up. The bell rang clean behind him on his way out. Same note it always rang. Delia turned back to the shelf she'd been dusting, the coffee can catching the morning light.